You are.
All right, guys. So I want you to jump real quickly to page, I think 15, linear programming classwork. So as I'm going through these problems, we've already talked about graphing inequalities. We're going to be doing a whole lot of that. We already talked about once we're done graphing, we will have an overlapping shaded region, which we call the feasible region. We've already talked about briefly that the corners, the edges, the vertices of that feasible region will be where you possibly can optimize or maximize your profit or revenue or minimize your cost. So, and we've also gone through that little advisory sheet where I gave you some guidelines of what to do to help break down what very well may seem like tough problems. And we're going to do as many of these classwork problems as we can. And then there's, I think, 4 homework problems for you to work on. And if you know how to do these, you'll be fine. Most, if not every problem I've ever given on a test is very similar to these. All right, so even if you struggle, yeah, I guess you could memorize your way through it if you wanted to, but I'm hoping you don't have to just memorize. Anyway, we're going to read through these problems, and then I'm going to kind of show you step by step how I would go about it, but you're going to see that they follow those guidelines. All right, and you're going to feel probably on the first reading where it's just blah, 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 blah. That's why these guidelines are pretty helpful. So a merchant, not necessarily Robert, but some vendor, merchant, whatever, plans to sell 2 models of compact, this is such an old problem, isn't it? Of compact disc players. All right, he buys these from a wholesaler at costs of $250 and $400 and plans to sell them at an increased price. The $250 model will yield a profit of $45. The $400 model will yield a profit of $50. Kind of a weak markup, but whatever. The merchant estimates that the total monthly demand will not exceed 250 units. The merchant does not want to invest more than $70,000 in inventory for these products. Find the number of units of each model that should be stocked in order to maximize profit. What did I tell you to look for initially? What is the question? And the question helps you define your variables. And I encouraged you when you write down like your X and your Y, which you want to use because we're graphing X and Y. When you write those down, label them not loosely like X is this, but like really clearly like the number of this or the profit that I'm making. And the reason why you'll see later, when I start writing out these inequalities, you can kind of check to see if you're right by seeing if the units on the left and the right would match. And by really labeling these values, they stand for units. And it will help you kind of double check kind of with stoichiometry whether or not you've set it up well. So anyway, the question was find the number of units of each model. So if I'm doing it, I'm going to say, well, how about, I'll tell you what, let me move that up a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to say let X equal the number of, let's just say the cheap model. Not that it's that cheap. And then Y would be the number of the more expensive model. So that was the first thing I asked you to do, was to find what the question was asking and to label those values, those variables appropriately. And then what did I say to do? You can flip back.
The equation.
Find the what equation?
Profit.
The profit, revenue, loss, cost, whatever it is we're talking about. And we're talking about what? Profit. So I'm going to say the profit equation, but this time it's not like a regular function like f of x where you plug x in. It's a profit equation affected by x and y. So this value, we call it profit of xy, is not going to be graphed on your paper. All right. You could actually think about this graph to find it, but there's an easier, and I might show you that, but there's an easier way to go about figuring out where you're maximizing your profit. So my profit equation, what is it telling me I'm profiting? $45 for each what? For each cheap model. So I'm going to make $45 based on however many cheap models I sell, and $50 for every expensive model. All right. So that's my profit equation. And at this point, I am going to kind of maybe just draw a line or something just to say this right here is not going to be graphed directly. I mean, obviously I have an X and Y axis. It's not going to be graphed directly right now, but I'm just going to, I've got that out of the way, and I can come in here and say, all right, I don't need to worry about the profit stuff anymore. I can draw a line through profit of 50 and profit of 45 so I don't get it confused with anything else I'm graphing. All right? Okay, then what did I tell you to do in that little suggestions page? Nobody wants to look back at it except Matt. Do what? Anything that hints at an inequality, right? So where do I see inequality show up here?
No more than 70,000.
Okay, it will not exceed 250. I do not want to invest more than 70,000. Anything else? Let's just go with those. If I will not exceed 250, right? That means I must be less than or equal to 250 what? Units. And these stand for the number of the cheap model. So this is like a number of units, right? So right here, I will not exceed 250 units. So right here, if this is units and X and Y are also units that I'm selling, right? What do you think an equation would be?
X plus Y.
X plus Y is 250. So X plus Y. And you could check that because this is a number that I'm selling. This is a number that I'm selling. And the total number has to be less than or equal to 250. So I feel pretty good about that equation. What about 70 grand? Now, do you know the difference between what inventory is? When like the consumer buys it, right? But when the merchant buys things in order to sell later at a profit, he has an inventory on hand, right? So his inventory can't get better. Will not invest more than 70 grand. Maybe that's all he could get on a loan or whatever. I don't know. Maybe that's all he had in the bank. So this is his dollars. This is a dollar amount, right? You don't have to put the dollar sign, but it's right there. But you definitely have to think, wait a minute, this right here is money I'm talking about. Okay? So right here, how can I get a situation here that talks about money? Okay, so I'm going to spend his wholesaler, it's just the merchant, he's going to spend $250 for each of those. And he's going to spend what else? $400 for each of those. And yes, he's going to sell them for more, but that has to do with this profit equation. And if you're wondering about this, X is what? So I have basically $250 per model, right? I'm $250 a model times the number of the, or $250 you could say per unit, times the number of units. The units cancel, and what do I end up with? Dollars. This is saying I'm spending $400 per unit, and I'm multiplying it by the number of units. Units cancel, and dollars plus dollars equals dollars. So a lot of times, if it wasn't, I think this one was kind of obvious, but when it's not obvious, don't forget to kind of think about what you're writing, because the value on the left has to equal the value on the right. So the units have to match up. Okay? So anyway, for whatever that's worth, come back to me, please. Seriously. No. The heck is that? Yesterday? Oh, well, here we go. So we've already talked about X and Y. X is units, number of units cheap. Y is number of units or models, whatever, of expensive. My profit of X and Y was 45X plus 50Y. And we said that X plus Y had to be less than or equal to 250. And we said that 250X plus 400Y has to be less than or equal to 70,000. Now, is there anything else I'm forgetting? Because sometimes inequalities are, yes.
You can't sell zero. So like you can.
I technically could sell zero, but I can't go negative. So my number of models, my number of units, I can't have a negative number of those. X greater than or equals 0, and I can't have a negative number of Y's. y greater than or equal to 0. You really need to remember those. People forget them all the time. And you're like, well, why do I need them? Well, how do you think I got into this first quadrant? All right, what does x greater than or equal to 0 give me? That shaded to the right. What does y greater than or equal to 0 give me? That shaded above. So that's why I'm in the first quadrant right here. So you need to write those. I will say that I count off significantly less if you forget those than if you miss these. Like if you forgot those two values, you might get dotted, lose a point, point and a half or whatever. But please remember those on a problem, because I realize a lot of people get equations wrong. I'm not going to give you a problem where you do this all in one step. Because if you make a mistake, everything goes south. So what I might do on a test is give you a few of these and say, write out your profit equation and the equations you would use to find the feasible region. And you would stop here. And I might give you another problem, ask you the same thing, right? So if you forgot those, you know, I might just dot you where these three things would be the worst, but worth the most. Second thing I might do is give you a setup like this and say, or maybe even like this and say, graph the inequalities to see if you can. So I will split these problems on your test into a bunch of parts. You'll get a taste of that on your review. And you'll see that if you make a little mistake, it won't just continue to snowball on you and make life miserable. But here we're going to finish it out. All right. So how do I graph these? I've given you and I will give you a graph that looks just like this. It's labeled by tens, but clearly tens isn't going to do it. I mean, it's labeled by one. Looks like it's by ones, 10 to 10. Is that going to fit x plus y is 250? So what do you kind of need to know to label this thing and get it graphed where you can see this picture? What would be a good thing to know? Because right now, if I try to graph this, I'm going to be walking out on the other side of this building to get to x-intercept of 250 to kind of get going or whatever to try to sketch this thing. So you need to relabel your axis, relabel this accordingly so you can fit that graph in. So what would be a nice thing to know?
Oh, the intercept.
Yes, you could do that. And you could find, she's saying, what if I solve for y? I would have y equals mx plus b. The only thing I would hesitate on doing it that way, because even though you would see the y-intercept, you're not going to see the x-intercept from that. So like, let's just say the y-intercept ended up being 90. And you'll go, oh, great, I'll just label this 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and I'll mark the y-intercept. But what if the slope's like 1/9? You're going down 1 over 9, down 1. I can't even see where it ended up. So if it's me, I think it's better to just find the intercepts, and then you can look at them. And if the biggest intercept of all of your intercepts is like 250, well, then maybe label this out to 250 or maybe 300 or something. If the biggest y-intercept is 400, well, then label this by 40s and go to 400 or maybe 500. So I'm about to do that. But right here, you can clearly see the x and the y-intercepts here are what? Are 250. They're a little bit harder to see here. What's the x-intercept here when you plug in 0 for y? What would you do? So 70,000 divided by 250, and you get 280. So right here, your x-intercept is 280, and your y-intercept is when I plug in 0 for x, and that's 70,000 divided by 400. So after doing a little quick math, I get 280 and 175. It's easy to see that these are both 250. Your biggest one on the x is what? So how do you want to label your tick marks? You can go by 28s, but I don't love that. What would you want to go by? 30s? That's fine. You can go by 50s. You could go by 100s. But if I go by 100s, your 280s right there. So if it's me on the x, I'm going to go by 30s. So that's, use a different color. So right here, that's a 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, 180, 210, 240, 270, 300. Right? And then on the y's, what was your greatest intercept? 250. If you want to do those by 25s, I mean, I don't care. Knock yourself out. I mean, you could go by 25s. You could do the same thing and just go by 30s on those two. What do you want to do? 25s. So again, it doesn't really matter. 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150, 175, 200, 225, 250. So now I can come in here. She's blue. And I can go and sketch this thing. It has an x-intercept. I'm sorry, it has a y-intercept of 250 right there. It has an x-intercept of 240. So I mean 250. So if that's 240, that's 250. And then you just gotta try to draw a halfway decent line from there to there. All right. Then, and you know what's the shading on that thing. And keep in mind, the shading on the x greater than 0 and y greater than 0 is what put you in the first quadrant. Are you with me? So technically, those two right there, I've already graphed this to the right and this up. And I don't need you to do that. We're already in the first quadrant, but I do need you to write them down just to make a point. Oh, and by the way, it's not always x greater than 0. I might have said somewhere in here that, hey, he's going to have to sell at least 10 of those cheap models. All right, x greater than or equal to 10. So look for other things as well. But anyway, so at this point, I'm going to be shading down or towards the origin, right? So at this point, I have this triangle shaded. And then what about this thing? We found that my x-intercept was 280. So I'm going to come in here and mark that's 270. Here's a 280. And my y-intercept was 175. And we're going to do the best 280. Right there, we're going to do the best we can to sketch a line there. And that also would be shaded what? Down. So I've got the X and the Y ones up, the other two down. So it gives me this feasible region. And hopefully that feels a lot like what we did yesterday in class when we were just scrapping inequalities. Now, once I have this, what does that feasible region represent?
It's where you're making a profit.
It's where I'm making a profit. Anything in here suggests I'm making a, or at least if it gives me a positive number, it represents where I make a profit. Anywhere on the outside that's not shaded, or anywhere, which is also over here, anything over here in the second, third, fourth quadrant, anything over here that's white, I am not profiting at all. I am losing money. Okay? So right here, here's where I'm making profit. So if the merchant just wanted to make profit, right? Maybe he was at a side hustle and he's trying to look for some write-offs and just said, hey, if I break even or better, then maybe he doesn't care. But this guy is doing this so he'll maximize my profit or his profit. So where would you maximize the profit? At the intersection points. Now, not at all of them, but that's where you have the best chance of either maximizing profit or minimizing cost. Now, obviously, at 0, 0, I'm not doing well, am I? Right? So 0, 0 is, it's not necessarily like this is going to do better than that, but the place where you would do the best always shows up at one of the intersection points, which is either that one, that one, that one, or that one. Now, clearly 0, 0, plugging that in there does not maximize your profit. You have a profit to 0. Okay? But you need to find those points. So what is that point? 0, 175. So you're going to take that 0, 175, and you're going to shove it in your profit equation, which gives you no $45 profits, but 175 $50 profits. So 175 times that 50 gives me 87.50. So basically, if he sold only the expensive units, he makes 87.50, which not bad. If you're making that every month, does it say month? Yeah, monthly. Then you're running about what, close to 100 grand a year. It's not too bad, right? I mean, it's, for running a business and taking a lot of risk, I would say that it's not all that great, but this guy's doing okay. All right, now you also have 0, 0. You know, sometimes I don't even bother checking that thing, but it's not a big deal to check it. So write it out. Clearly, that's not going to be your answer. You also have what? 250 down here. 250 comma 0. So the profit at 250 comma 0. Well, I'm making $45 for each of those $250 units. That's 11,250. Well, clearly, I don't want to sell just the expensive model. I'd be better off selling, if I had to pick just one unit, sell just the cheap model. But most of the time in your work, now again, depends on the profit equation. You can't always go, oh, it's the intersection point. Like I can easily change that profit equation where it's not that. All right. And we can talk about why that works, but whatever. But the bottom line is don't always assume it's that one because I'll probably make the test where it's not. But how do I know this point? I would have to set which equations? Well, the ones involved in the intersection, right? Which are these two. I have to take these two equations and solve the system. Now, you got tons of ways to solve the system, right? But if you had your calculator, what would be a nice way to solve that system?
Solve for one of the variables and plug it in.
How about just graph it? Now, you can do that without a calculator, right? If I solve for, say, y and plug it in there and then resolve for x, that's how we would do it if we didn't have a calculator. Or you could do linear combination, right? I can cancel a 0 out of this or divide out by 0, and then I can multiply the top by -25, cancel out the x's, solve for the y's, plug it back in and get your x. Lots of ways you can solve it. You already know. Yes?
So,
I don't know. I do remember that people didn't. Whatever I did last year, they were fine with it. And I'll probably do the similar format this year. So right here, let's just say you had a calculator. I can't graph that, right? So I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to go to my graphing page. I'm going to delete out everything else that was there. I am going to change my window to reflect that because I want to see this intersection. So I'm going to go, stop me at any point if you don't see what I'm saying. And if I go to this camera, it uses a different speaker and it goes, you saw that a little bit on one of my videos. So I'm trying to avoid that. But go to window and I'm going to go window settings. I'm going to change the X from 0 to a maximum of 300. And I'm going to change the Y from 0 to a max of 250. And you can change the scale to reflect that, but I don't care. I'm going to let my calculator solve. Okay. Then I'm going to hit tab. Oh, mine says relation from something I did yesterday. So I'm going to escape. And do you remember how to change it out of relation? Anybody have relation mode right now? No? If you hit tab and it says function, if you hit tab and it says relation, go back to menu and to graph entry. So I don't want to enter a relation. I'm going to hit 3 and I'm going to hit 1, enter a function. So now it should say f1 of x. So how do I write this in terms of f? 250 minus the x. And by the way, you don't have to clean it up. So I'm just going to write 250 minus that x for my first equation. And then I'm going to hit enter, and you're going to see that graph. I'm going to hit tab again. How are you going to solve for y in the second equation? And again, you don't have to simplify it. So what would you be doing? So you'd be subtracting the 250 and then what? Dividing the whole thing. How can I divide the whole thing here? I can either what? Use a fraction button. So I can create a fraction and then just type that 70,000 on the top, subtract the 250x, and then go down and divide it by the 400. So I basically see this on my screen. I made a fraction and I know the 70,000 is already over there. I subtract the 250x and then just divide by the 400. Don't bother simplifying and making it look like some pretty form. I don't do that. So once I do that and hit enter, I can see where they cross. It looks very similar to what I have here. And then I can just find the intersection. So menu, analyze the graph at the 4 intersection. It asks for lower upper bound. Click lower, click upper, and I get 200, 50. So it turns out that point is 200, 50. So I check it in my profit, and it turns out 200 of the $45 model added to 50 of the $50 model makes me 11,500. Now, you might look at that and go, man, is it worth $250 to have to deal with 2 different models? And I got to train guys to install 2 different ways. Maybe I got to figure. You might not. You might go, you know what? It's easier just to sell one kind. But I think if you look at fast food places, there's a reason why Taco Bell is trying to sell chicken wings, right? Because there's a market for that, even though they might be terrible, right? There's a reason why McDonald's, got away from hamburgers back when I was a kid and started selling toxic nuggets or whatever. They did that for diversity, and usually diversity gives you a better profit in the end. Not always. There's a reason also why they only sell the McRib temporarily, because it's not worth keeping it on the menu all the time, and there's only a few people that probably really. Anybody like the McRib? That's it. Yeah, there's just a few people, so they just sell it sporadically, and they get people to come running in there for the McRib. I don't get it, but whatever. I haven't eaten McDonald's now in 19 years. When my daughter was 5, she wanted a Happy Meal or something. I went in there. It's been a while, and I got I don't know. In my head, I love McDonald's. Like when I was a kid, loved it. It just made me so sick. And then I saw the movie Super Size Me. Anybody ever see that?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I am out. Yeah, that dude I almost had a heart attack.
Yeah.
Anyway, whatever. It's worth watching, you fast food lovers. So what have I answered the question yet? I have people all the time to go, maximum profits of 11,500.
Now you gotta find a number.
Was that the question? The question was find the number of units of each model. So the number of units of each model, I want to sell 200 of the cheap model, and I want to sell 50 of the expensive model. Now that might not be the question. The question might be profit, right? I mean, it could be something else, but make sure you pay attention to that question. You seeing this? All right, let's try something else.
How did you see you got rid of the relation on your calculator?
I went almost everything goes through menu. So just go back through menu, and you'll see when you hit that. Hold on, escape. I gotta be on the right screen. When you hit menu, you see what kind of graph are you wanting to enter? Graph entry. Are you trying to enter a function? Are you trying to enter a relation? You try to enter a polar coordinate. You trying to. So if you hit 3 for graph entry, I think it's 3 on mine, but this is an old version. See function, relation, parametric equations, polars. We're going to do parametrics and polars in here. Like if you want to play with it, go down to parametric and hit 4. What do you see now?
A lot of different
X's and Y's and T's. So this shows how things move along the X and move along the Y with respect to time. Like if you throw a ball through the air, it makes a parabola. So those are parameters on X and Y. If you change that menu and you go to graph entry and you hit polar, you get R equals theta, or R of theta equals something. If you type in R1 theta equals 5, you get a radius of 5. You get a big circle. There's all kinds of polar graphs that we'll talk about. But we typically deal in function mode. So menu, graph entry, function. And that gets you to what you want. All right, clearing that out. Let's check out this one. It says an accounting firm has 900 hours of staff time and 100 hours of reviewing time available. The firm charges $2,000 for an audit and $300 for a tax return. Each audit requires 100 hours of staff time and 10 hours of review time. Each tax return requires 12 and a half hours of staff time and 2.5 hours of review time. What number of audits and tax returns will yield the maximum revenue? So and again, that's a lot of crap being thrown at you, right? So we want to have a plan for breaking all that down. Cold? Sorry.
I feel like the Coach D keeps thinking things.
Just a tea.
That's exaggerating.
I like a little cold. What's your house temperature on at night? 65? I went down to 66, and my wife left our room, found a down sleeping bag, and I found her in another, I found her in another room in a down sleeping bag, just like shivering. Just like, I was like, I love a cold face and a warm up. Anyway, all right. So what's the question? My son does that. He's been living in the basement since he got home for Christmas, and he leaves the door open, and it freezes out the basement. Like the basement, I walked down the other day, it was 39 degrees in the basement, and the only thing separating from it's like a man cave down here. The only thing separating the man cave from my upstairs where I sleep is 1.5 inches of subfloor. So my room dropped. What happens is the room out there drops temperature, which kicks the heater on and burns us up upstairs. So I would wake up at like 3 in the morning in a puddle of sweat. I'm like, what is happening? My son's down there. Anyway, we've had a conversation. All right. So right here, dang it, come on. So annoying. Okay. So what am I asking you about?
Audits and tax returns.
Number of audits. So right here, I'm going to say X is, this is probably a little tricky maybe for some, the number of audits that I can do as an accounting firm. An audit, by the way, is where somebody comes in and looks over all of your accounting methods and makes sure they can do it aggressively like the IRS and audit you and try to bring fire and brimstone upon your family. Or sometimes companies, like we have an audit company that comes in and makes sure our books are okay so we don't get in trouble. We actually had bad books in Homewood about 10, 12 years ago, and it really put us in a bad financial position. For a number of years, they increased class sizes. We never had class sizes of 22. Look at some of these pictures. You're going to see class sizes of 6, class sizes of 15. If you ever get in the 20s, it's amazing. But now it's like everything's huge. Well, except for 7th period, it's pretty kind of big. I remember once I had 19 people sign up for a pre-cal class, and they said, "Ooh, that's too many. We need to split that." They split it into 2. Yeah.
Can we have this exam?
They're doing a new exam policy. You heard that on the speaker, and they're going to let not has anything to do with attendance. I believe if things move forward, like you said, they're going to let you exempt one exam where you have a C or B.
Does it matter what class? Like,
Wouldn't matter. Well, it can't be an AP class.
Can it be pre-AP though?
Oh yeah, exempt away. Yeah, exempt away. Hey guys, back to here. We got to get through a couple of these. Focus. X is number of audits. Y is number of tax returns. And a tax return is like what all your parents and I do. At the end of the year, we take all the profits and the losses from our, whether we're working or whether we have an LLC or a side company, whatever, we take all of that stuff. You either do the math yourself or give it to an accountant, and he does a tax return for you and says, hey, this is, or she does, says, this is what you need to pay to the IRS, or this is what you're getting back. So that's a little different from an audit. Audits take a lot of time to go through and pour over all the balance sheets and all the stuff that you have to deal with, or look through all your, make sure that you're not cooking the books if you're a company and trying to make yourself look better than you are, or whatever. Maybe you've forgotten something huge. Try to keep you compliant with the IRS. All right, so we got that. And then does you see anything about profit here or what?
Maximum revenue.
Okay, so we're talking about revenue, and what am I doing? I'm making
2,000 per audit.
2,000 for each X, for each audit, and 300 for each Y. So this is my revenue equation. So revenue of X, Y, and once we have those 3 things kind of written out, I'm just going to draw a line and kind of ignore that. And I'm also going to draw through the 2,000 to 300 so I don't accidentally include that in other information. Now, do you see any inequalities? These are much less obvious. X is the number of audits. So what I want to say, the number of audits is less than or equal to 900. But what about that 900? That's hours. What about it?
You can have
You
it.
got 9 on it.
So wait,
Okay, you're thinking ahead of time. We can figure it out later. You're trying to do some math in your head.
10, 100x plus 12.5y has to be less than or equal to 900.
Okay, so let's got it. If I have 900 hours of staff time available, like I have a company, right? I only have so many people. They can only work so many hours. So the total number of hours has to be less than or equal to 900 hours. I'm going to put hours of staff. Okay. It has to be not less than 900 hours because that's all I have available. Right. And then I also only have 100 hours of review time. And maybe that means that I have, staff time and review time. What? Hold on. Staff review. Okay, yes. Okay. So, and what else? Any other inequalities? Sorry. X is greater than or equal to 0. Why? Because I'm not going to do that, right? So I got less. I'm sorry. I've got at least 0 audits that I'm going to do. I'm not going to do negative audits, and I'm going to do at least 0 returns. So those pretty quickly, X and Y have to be greater than or equal to 0. Now looking at that 900, this is staff time. When you read through this staff time, what do you see? An audit, X, requires what? 100 hours of staff time. This is a staff hours equation. So 100 hours of staff hours are going to be used for each X. But also what? 12.5 hours of staff time is going to be used for each what? Tax return. So each Y. And I've used that 100, sorry, I've used that 100 hours. I've used that 100 hours of staff and that 12.5 hours of staff. I'm not going to reuse that again. What else do I see? Each audit, X, is going to use 10 hours of review. So each X is going to use 10 hours of review. And what else? And 2.5 hours of review will be used for each tax return. And if you're trying to check units, 100 was what? And so number 100 was 100 hours per what? Per audit times the number of audits. Or you could say 100 hours of staff time per audit times the number of audits. And what do you end up with? 100 staff hours over here, hours, staff, and the units kind of match up. And again, I think most of you kind of saw those. But what do I have? I got a bunch of inequalities. I can start graphing them. These bottom two kind of already put me in the first quadrant. So I can kind of pretend that they're already there, forcing my shaded area into that. So, but remember that, because that shaded area, once again, is going to give me 0, 0 right there. Right, it should. And then how do I solve for these other ones? How do I label my graph? My units? So if I do that, my x-intercept ends up being what here? I can do that in my head. So my x-intercept was 9. My y-intercept is 900 over 12.5. That's going to be a little bit bigger. Is it 72 even? Okay. And then on the other one, my x-intercept is going to be 10, and my y-intercept is going to be 40. And now that I know my x-intercepts and my y-intercepts, what are you going to label your x as? How about just out to 10? So label it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which kind of makes sense, right? Because an accounting firm with only 900 hours, you got a total of 1,000 hours, and these audits take a ton of time, right? Ton of time right there. So you're not going to be able to do that many of them if you decide to be just an audit company. The tax returns, man, it's a nice way. And I pay my accountant to do all of our family taxes. He's probably getting $1,600, $1,700. And the first year he does it, charges like $125 an hour. It doesn't take him that long. He just kind of bases like a car dealership does. You ever wonder why you may not, because you're not probably paying your car bill, but you get your car bill and they bill you for like 13 hours of labor. And you're like, I brought it in here at 8 and you were done at 3. That's 7 hours. How are you billing me for 13? Well, you don't understand, sir. That's what it says in ours. I'm like, I don't care. You've had my car for 7 hours. Why am I getting billed for 13 hours? Well, maybe the guy worked fast. I'm like, it's bizarre, but whatever. It's still laughable that they charge you this hourly fee. It's whatever. Anyway, so I'm going to label this the first graph, and then how am I going to do the y-axis? Tens if you want to make it nice and simple and clean. Eights if you want to get up to 80. 7.2 if you really feel like it. I got to be honest, I might just go 10 because it's up there fairly nicely, but it's up to you. So if I did 10, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and you don't have to label them. Again, as long as you can just come up the top and label 100 and label 10 if you want. But now, sketching this out, x-intercept of 9, y-intercept of 72, somewhere right there. Sketch a straight line. X-intercept of 10, over there. Y-intercept of 40, and sketch a straight line right there, straight as possible. Both of these graphs were shading towards the origin. Both of these were shading away from the origin. What does that give me? That feasible region that has 4 points, including the obviously terrible 0, 0. So what is my revenue for 0, 0? Clearly nothing. What is my revenue for 0, 72? Well, you'd have to plug in 300. Sorry, you'd have to plug in 300 times that 72 in your revenue equation. So that's 21,600. So they're going to make 21,600 a month or each week. This company, now granted, they've got salaries to pay, right? Revenue is different than profit. So they're going to make 21,600 a week if they only did Ys or only did tax returns. So if they were just like a whatever, knocked out tax returns, that's all they did. Great. They make a little profit. They're happy, maybe. But this company wants to maybe see if they can do a little bit better. If I plug in the other one, which was what? Not x-intercept of, hold on, y-intercept of 72, x-intercept of 40. I'm sorry, y-intercept of 40. Wait a minute. Why did I do that?
I don't know.
I have no idea. Very sorry. That is not a point at my, that's not a critical number. 40 is a critical number. So they're going to make much less doing just tax returns. So 40 times 300 is 12,000. Well, no, it's less, but some. Good business. And then what's the other point? Another point? 90. 90 is going to make me 18,000. So clearly I'm better off just being an audit company if it's just going to be one or the other. But what's that point? But just like before, I could solve for y and graph them, right? Or you could, if you wanted to, get rid of the decimals or maybe multiply the bottom by a -5, would make that -12.5 and do addition and subtraction. I don't care, but take the two graphs, either graphically, I only got a couple minutes, but either graphically or manually, take those two graphs, figure out that point. I think you end up with 8, 8. Whatever method you use. And if I check the revenue at 8, 8, I end up getting 16,000 and 24, sorry, plus 2,400. So what, 18,400? And you can see I'm really better off doing a combination of the two. And $400 a month might not be much, but multiply that by 12, you got close to $5,000 a year. And if you're running the company, that's a quick trip to the beach. You don't stay at Roseberry. Stay in the flats, way in the back. Y'all with me? All right, there's 2 more. I think I posted the classwork, but there's 2 more on here. And we also have Tuesday when you get back, that this is usually what we talk about the most if you want to run through any of the homework stuff. But make sure you know how to do this stuff. Better.